Before the sea became a road for empire, it was a wall. It broke ships against hidden stone. It swallowed men who trusted the wind too much. It kept islands apart, protected cities from distant enemies, and turned every coastline into a question. A king could march an army across plains. He could burn villages, take harvests, and break gates with timber and iron. But beyond the beach, his power thinned. The water belonged to storms, pirates, fishermen, and the gods. Then a narrow wooden weapon appeared on the horizon. Low in the water. Fast under oar. Its bronze beak pointed forward like the head of a hunting animal. Inside its hull, nearly 200 men breathed in rhythm, packed shoulder to shoulder, pulling against the sea until the ship itself seemed alive. The trireme did not simply carry war across the water. It changed what war on the water could be. In the old world of the eastern Mediterranean, ships had long been useful, but rarely decisive in the way armies were decisive. Merchants moved olive oil, wine, cedar, grain, and silver between ports. Raiders struck at weak coastlines. Warriors were ferried to beaches, where the real killing still belonged to spears, shields, and men standing face to face. Sea battles often became confused boarding actions, drifting collisions of hulls, hooks, arrows, and hand-to-hand violence. A ship was a platform. A bridge. A carrier of men. The trireme made the ship itself a weapon. Its ancestry reached back through centuries of experiment. Long before Athens rose to command the Aegean, seafaring peoples had learned that speed mattered. The Phoenicians, masters of trade and navigation, built elegant galleys that could run along coasts and cross open water when the weather allowed. Greeks, Cypriots, Egyptians, and others borrowed, adapted, and competed. Every generation asked the same question in wood, rope, and sweat. How do you make a ship faster without making it too heavy to move? One answer was more oars. But oars took space. Place too many men on one level, and the hull became long, fragile, and slow to turn. Stack rowers badly, and the oars tangled. Build the vessel too high, and it became unstable. The breakthrough was not merely adding manpower. It was arranging manpower with ruthless intelligence. 3 banks of oars. Not 3 decks in the modern sense, but 3 staggered levels of rowers, each man assigned a narrow position in a carefully balanced machine. The lowest rowers sat close to the water. Above and outward, another line worked their oars. Higher still, the top rowers pulled in rhythm through outriggers that widened the sweep without making the whole hull clumsy. The trireme was not a massive ship. It was long, lean, and vulnerable if mishandled. It depended on discipline more than brute size. Its power came from coordination, from the drumbeat, the shouted orders, the timing of men who had to move as one body or become useless. A single rower could not dominate the sea. 170 rowers, trained into one pulse, could turn pine and bronze into terror. At the waterline, the ram waited. Bronze, heavy, and shaped to punch into enemy timber, it was mounted at the bow where the force of the whole vessel could be focused into one violent instant. The old dream of naval combat had been to reach the enemy ship, climb aboard, and kill its men. The trireme offered a colder possibility. Strike the hull. Break the oars. Rip open the side. Leave the enemy alive long enough to understand that the sea beneath him was entering. This required a different kind of courage. On land, a warrior could see the shield in front of him and the spear coming toward him. At sea, the decisive blow might arrive from the flank, below eye level, in a roar of water and timber. A captain had to judge distance while waves lifted and dropped his bow. A helmsman had to swing the stern at exactly the right moment. Rowers had to accelerate on command without seeing the target. If panic touched the benches, the ship died before the ram struck. The men inside the hull were not ornaments to aristocratic war. They were the engine. For Greek cities, this fact carried consequences that reached far beyond battle. A trireme demanded labor, money, timber, metal, dockyards, rope makers, sail makers, trainers, pilots, and thousands of ordinary citizens who could pull an oar in disciplined rhythm. The weapon was not only a vessel. It was a political and economic commitment. A city that built triremes had to organize itself around the sea. The old order preferred visible strength, walls, hoplites, noble cavalry, shields bright in the sun, armor passed down through families. The trireme lowered power into a darker place. It gave strategic importance to men without land, men without grand armor, men whose strength was measured in endurance and timing. A poor citizen at an oar could become part of the machine that protected a city from invasion and projected its will across the islands. This made some elites uneasy. Because ships did not only change tactics. They changed who mattered. In archaic Greece, power had been tied to land. Farmers who could afford armor formed phalanxes. Aristocrats bred horses. Families measured honor in fields, tombs, and names remembered by poets. The sea was useful, but it was restless, commercial, morally suspect to many old minds. Trade made wealth too quickly. Sailors brought foreign habits. Harbors mixed languages and customs. Ships loosened the grip of the countryside. Yet the geography of Greece kept pushing men toward the water. Mountains cut communities apart. Good farmland was limited. Islands dotted the Aegean like stepping stones, but each stepping stone could become a fortress, a market, or a threat. Control of the sea meant control of grain routes, tribute, colonies, alliances, and escape. A city that ignored naval power might remain proud. It might also remain trapped. By the late 6th and early 5th centuries before Christ, the trireme had become the sharpest answer to the Aegean problem. Corinth used naval strength to guard trade and influence. Aegina became a powerful maritime rival. Phoenician fleets served great kings. The Persian Empire, stretching from Anatolia to Egypt and beyond, understood that armies needed ships to cross straits, supply campaigns, and crush resistance along the coasts. The trireme was no longer an experiment. It was becoming the grammar of power. No city would embrace that grammar more completely than Athens. Athens did not begin as the inevitable master of the sea. It was a city of farmers, craftsmen, aristocratic memory, and bitter internal struggles. It had enemies nearby and rivals across the water. It had ambition, but ambition alone does not build fleets. Fleets require money, and in a moment of strange fortune, Athens found silver. At Laurion, in the mines of Attica, new wealth emerged from the earth. The question was what to do with it. A safer city might have distributed the profit among citizens and enjoyed a brief calm. Themistocles, one of the most dangerous minds in Greek history, saw something else. He saw ships. He understood that the coming threat would not be solved by pride alone. Persia had already shown the scale of imperial war. The king could gather armies from many peoples, and his fleets could move along the coast with a reach no single Greek city could match. If Athens remained only a land power, it could be bypassed, isolated, or burned. But if Athens built a navy large enough, fast enough, and disciplined enough, the city could make the sea itself into a shield. The argument was not romantic. It was practical, costly, and controversial. A fleet of triremes meant spending the silver not on immediate comfort, but on wood, bronze, ship sheds, and training. It meant persuading citizens that the future of the city might depend on men sitting in darkness beneath a deck, pulling oars until their hands split. The decision changed Athens forever. Dockyards filled with noise. Timber was shaped into long ribs and narrow hulls. Bronze rams were cast and fitted. Ropes were twisted. Sails were prepared, though in battle the sail would often be taken down, leaving the oars as the true heart of the vessel. Men learned commands. They learned how to back water, how to turn, how to hold formation, how to keep silence when fear made the chest tighten. A trireme was fragile on land and hungry at sea. It could not carry supplies for endless journeys. Its rowers needed water, food, rest, and shorelines. Its hull needed maintenance. Its speed came at the price of endurance. This made naval war a contest of logistics as much as courage. Harbors, beaches, repair sites, and supply lines became part of the battlefield. The sea looked empty to the untrained eye. To a naval commander, it was crowded with invisible limits. Wind. Current. Distance to shore. Fatigue. Weather. Morale. The angle of sunlight. The skill of enemy pilots. The willingness of rowers to obey the drum even when another bronze ram was coming straight toward them. When the Persian invasion came, these questions ceased to be theory. In 480 BC, Xerxes brought the weight of empire toward Greece. His forces crossed into Europe. Cities surrendered or were abandoned. At Thermopylae, a small Greek force delayed the Persian advance and entered legend, but the land route was eventually forced. Athens faced disaster. The city was evacuated. Its people took refuge on ships and islands, watching the place of their fathers stand exposed. The Acropolis burned. For many, that should have meant the end. But Themistocles had built a different kind of Athens, one that could survive even when its streets were lost. Its wooden walls were not the palisades of a fortress. They were the hulls of its triremes. The Greek fleet gathered near Salamis, a narrow stretch of water where numbers could be compressed and imperial scale could become a burden. The Persians and their allies had many ships, including skilled Phoenician crews and contingents from across the empire. Their fleet was formidable. In open water, its size might have crushed the Greeks. But Salamis was not open water. It was a trap made of geography, nerve, and timing. The night before the battle, the waters were tense with rumor. Oars creaked in darkness. Men whispered prayers. Captains checked hulls, rams, and ropes. Rowers stretched aching backs and tried to sleep beside the instrument of their own survival. Somewhere across the strait, the imperial fleet waited with confidence, pressure, and uncertainty mixed together. At dawn, the ships moved. The first sight must have been terrible. Lines of triremes advancing in confined water, oars flashing, hulls closing, commands carrying over the waves. The sea that had divided cities now became a killing floor. In such combat, courage did not look like wild charge alone. It looked like discipline under pressure. Greek ships had to hold until the enemy crowded in. They had to resist the instinct to scatter. In narrow water, too many ships became a problem. Oars struck oars. Turning space vanished. A captain who lost position could expose his flank. A vessel that stopped moving became prey. Then the rams began to strike. Bronze met timber with a sound that carried through bone. Some blows shattered oar banks, leaving rowers maimed and ships helpless. Others punched into hulls. Water rushed in. Men trapped below had moments to climb, swim, or drown. Marines fought on decks when ships locked together. Arrows flew. Orders vanished inside shouting. The clean diagrams imagined by commanders dissolved into splintered wood, blood, spray, and fear. Yet the trireme rewarded those who could think inside chaos. A skilled crew might feint toward the bow, then slide past and turn sharply into the enemy's side. Another might shear away oars, crippling without sinking. A formation could lure an opponent forward, then close around him. Victory belonged not simply to the strongest arm, but to timing, training, and the ability to turn water into a battlefield with edges. At Salamis, the Persian advantage narrowed against itself. Their numbers crowded the straits. Communication became difficult. Ships from different regions, speaking different languages and trained under different habits, struggled to coordinate in the crush. Greek crews, fighting closer to home and under leaders who understood the water, exploited the compression. The trireme had found its stage. The battle did not destroy Persia in a single morning. Empires do not disappear because ships sink. But it broke the momentum of invasion. It showed that the sea could decide the fate of cities, temples, fields, and generations not yet born. It proved that a smaller force, properly placed and brutally trained, could make imperial mass stumble. For Athens, the lesson was intoxicating. The city had survived through ships. It had watched its land burn and then discovered that destruction did not equal defeat. After the Persian Wars, Athens did not retreat from the sea. It expanded into it. Its fleet became the backbone of an alliance that slowly hardened into empire. Tribute flowed. Islands obeyed. Rebellion could be answered by sails on the horizon and the knowledge that triremes moved faster than walls could be repaired. The same wooden weapon that saved freedom could also enforce domination. That is the older, harder truth of power. A trireme was not moral by design. It served the hands that built it, paid for it, rode it, and commanded it. In Athenian memory, the fleet became a symbol of democracy and resistance, because ordinary citizens at the oars had helped save the city. To others, especially those who later lived under Athenian pressure, those same hulls were instruments of control. They carried tribute collectors, soldiers, decrees, and consequences. The sea had become political. Every harbor now mattered differently. Every island sat inside a network of risk. Naval dominance meant food could be protected or denied. Trade could be encouraged or strangled. Allies could be defended, coerced, or punished. War was no longer only the season when armies marched across borders. It could arrive as a line of dark hulls, silent at first, then louder as the oars found rhythm. The technology also demanded a culture of preparation. A trireme fleet could not be improvised in panic. Crews had to train before the crisis. Ships had to be maintained before the storm. Commanders had to study waters they might one day turn into traps. The bronze ram was only the final point of a much larger system. Behind every impact were forests cut, miners underground, taxpayers grumbling, craftsmen measuring, magistrates arguing, and rowers learning to suffer together. This is why the trireme deserves more than admiration as an ancient machine. It reveals how military revolutions really happen. They are not born only from invention. They happen when a society reorganizes itself around an invention strongly enough to make that invention decisive. Other peoples had ships. Other peoples had courage. Other peoples knew the sea. But when triremes first dominated the Mediterranean imagination, they did so because speed, design, training, money, politics, and geography converged. The weapon was narrow, but the change behind it was vast. For the men inside the hull, the experience remained brutally human. The rower did not see grand strategy. He saw the back of the man in front of him. He smelled sweat, wet wood, oil, and fear. He heard the beat. He felt the hull tremble as the pace quickened. He knew that if the order came late, if the turn failed, if the enemy struck cleanly, the water outside would become the grave inside. For the commander on deck, the world narrowed to seconds. Too soon, and the ram missed. Too late, and his own ship broke. For the enemy watching a trireme accelerate toward his flank, history was not an idea. It was bronze, speed, and no room to turn. The dominance of the trireme would not last forever. No weapon does. Naval warfare continued to change. Larger ships appeared. Siege engines went to sea. Boarding tactics returned in new forms. Empires rose that used different fleets for different worlds. Rome would eventually master the Mediterranean with its own methods, and centuries later, sails, cannon, steam, steel, and aircraft would transform the ocean again. But there was a moment when the trireme stood at the center of maritime power, and in that moment, the ancient world learned a lesson it never forgot. The sea was not merely space between lands. It was territory. It could be fought over, organized, commanded, and used to decide the survival of cities. A narrow hull filled with ordinary men could carry the fate of a civilization. A coastline could become a frontier. A harbor could become the heart of an empire. A poor citizen with an oar could help turn away a king. That is why the image endures, a black line of ships at dawn, moving through gray water, each stroke pulling the future closer. The trireme did not conquer the sea by being indestructible. It conquered by making fragility disciplined. It turned vulnerable wood into speed, common labor into strategic force, and fear into rhythm. And for a time, when the bronze rams pointed forward and the oars struck the water together, every city on the shore understood the same warning. The age of walls alone was over. Power had learned to row.